9 months in, two people, a shared life in everything except name, the same weekends, the same inside references, the same 2 a.m. conversations, the same implicit understanding of what the other person needed, and still, the same answer to the question neither of them was asking out loud. We're just seeing where it goes. Where it was going was nowhere new. It was going exactly where it had been going for 9 months, which was forward without arriving, close without committing, warm without the specific vulnerability of saying out loud that this was the thing they wanted to keep. The situationship in 2026 doesn't feel like a trap while you're in it. It feels like the most modern, most emotionally intelligent, most pressure-free way to connect, and that's exactly what makes it one. If you want to understand exactly why this happens, hit that like button. Welcome to Unfiltered Adulthood, where we explore the quiet shifts that reshape us. Subscribe, and let's get back to the story. It began, as most situationships begin, with a genuine and reasonable decision, no pressure, no rushing, no forcing something into a shape before it was ready, just two people letting something develop at its own pace, which is, objectively, a mature and considered approach to the early stages of something that might become real. The first 2 months were not a trap. They were appropriate, they were what that stage of any connection requires, the low-pressure exploration of whether this was a person worth choosing, whether this dynamic had the qualities that a commitment would eventually need to sustain itself, whether the warmth was real or just novelty, all legitimate questions, all requiring time to answer, all used as justification for what came after. The 3rd month was where the calculation shifted. Quietly, without announcement, without either person consciously registering the transition, from, we're taking our time to make sure this is right, to, we're taking our time because naming it creates a risk that not naming it doesn't, and that shift, invisible in the behavior, invisible in the dynamic, invisible in the daily warmth of what they were building, changed the fundamental nature of what was happening. The dating app remained installed on both phones. Not used, not actively pursued, just present, just maintained, just the specific insurance policy of the 2026 romantic landscape, the one that says, I am here, I am invested, but I have not formally closed any doors, and the closing of doors is the thing that transforms a calculated risk into an uncalculated one. 37 texts on an average day, for evenings a week, the kind of knowing that only accumulates from consistent time across 9 months. And still the app, still the absence of a conversation, still the mutual maintenance of a plausible deniability that neither of them actually believed but both of them needed, because the deniability was not about each other. It was about the specific fear that commitment produces in a generation that has watched enough relationships fail to have developed a sophisticated and self-defeating system of protection against them. The system worked. In the narrow sense, in the sense that nothing was lost, nothing was risked, nothing was named that could later be unmade, and in working, produced the specific outcome that all successful risk avoidance produces, which is not safety but the permanent deferral of the very thing the risk was taken to obtain. The cost arrived on a Tuesday, not dramatically, not as a crisis, just as a question that formed during an ordinary evening and refused to dissolve into the ordinary evening the way questions usually did. They were comfortable, genuinely, not performed, the specific comfort of 9 months of consistent presence, of a person whose habits were known, whose reactions were readable, whose company had become one of the organizing facts of the week, and inside the comfort, the question. Is this what I actually want, or is this what I have, and have I been confusing the two for long enough that I can no longer tell the difference? The question was dangerous not because it had a bad answer but because it required an honest one. And an honest one required acknowledging that the 9 months had been organized, on both sides, not around building something but around maintaining something, around preserving the specific temperature of what existed rather than deciding whether what existed was what was actually wanted. 3 friends, similar situations, one 8 months in, one 11, one 14. All 3 describing the same architecture, the same warmth, the same absence of a conversation, the same answer when asked what it was, and all 3, privately, separately, carrying the same question that the warmth made difficult to ask and the comfort made easier to postpone. The postponement had a cost. Not visible in any single day, accumulated across months in the specific low-level expenditure of someone who is emotionally present in something they have not emotionally committed to, which is a different kind of energy than either full presence or full absence, a maintenance cost, a holding cost, the cost of keeping something warm without deciding whether to keep it. 14 months was the average, across those 3 friendships, before the situationship resolved. Either into something named or into nothing, and 14 months was also the average duration of the specific exhaustion that preceded the resolution, the exhaustion not of something being wrong but of something being indefinitely neither right nor wrong, suspended in the specific purgatory of almost. The shift didn't begin with a conversation, the conversation came later, was the result of the shift rather than the cause of it. It began with a single, private, internal acknowledgement that the comfort of the current arrangement was not the same thing as satisfaction with it, and that the conflation of the two had been the operating error of the previous 9 months. Not a decision to issue an ultimatum. That framing was wrong, was the framing of someone who had misunderstood what the problem was, who had located the problem in the other person's commitment level rather than in the shared avoidance that both of them had been equally invested in maintaining. Just an acknowledgement, private, that the next step was not a demand but a disclosure. Not, what are we, as a question requiring an answer but, this is what I want, as a statement requiring only honesty, the kind of honesty that removes the mutual deniability without removing the other person's freedom, that names the thing from one side without requiring the other side to immediately name it back. The conversation happened on a Wednesday, low-key, no constructed moment, no rehearsed sentences, just the disclosure, simply made, the specific words that communicated. I know what this is for me, I am telling you what it is, and I am not asking you to match it immediately, I am just done pretending I don't know. The other person's response was not immediate, 3 days, a quieter dynamic, the specific recalibration of someone whose own avoidance had just been gently removed as an option. And then a response, honest, uncertain, real, the first genuinely unmanaged exchange in 9 months, the first conversation in which both people were actually present rather than both people managing their presence. The outcome was not guaranteed, disclosure is not a strategy, does not produce a specific result, cannot be deployed in the expectation of a particular response. But it changed the nature of what was happening from suspension to reality, from the management of uncertainty to the navigation of it, from a trap both people were maintaining to a situation only one of them had created. This is not a story about the situationship becoming a relationship. It became one, in this case, it did, after 3 weeks of the first honest dynamic either of them had inhabited in 9 months. But that is not the point, was never the point, because the outcome of the disclosure is not within the control of the person making it, and anyone who makes it in the expectation of a specific result has misunderstood what it was for. What changed before the outcome, what changed regardless of what the outcome would have been, was the end of the maintenance, the end of the holding cost, the end of the specific exhaustion of being emotionally present in something unnamed, the restoration of the energy that had been spent keeping the uncertainty comfortable rather than examining whether the uncertainty was serving either of them. The dating app was deleted. Not as a gesture, not as a negotiating move, just as the natural consequence of having finally decided what was actually wanted, the insurance policy no longer necessary once the risk had been consciously accepted rather than indefinitely deferred. In 2026, the situationship is not a failure of emotional maturity. It is a rational adaptation to a dating culture that punishes vulnerability and rewards detachment, that has made caring more feel like losing, that has produced a generation of people who want connection deeply and have developed sophisticated systems for avoiding the specific moment that connection requires, which is the moment you say, out loud, what you actually want, before you know whether you're going to get it. The trap is not the uncertainty. Every connection begins in uncertainty, uncertainty is not the problem, the trap is the comfort, the way the uncertainty can be made so livable, so warm, so structured that leaving it requires more courage than entering it did. The situationship doesn't trap you with discomfort, it traps you with just enough comfort to make the risk of wanting more feel bigger than it actually is.